In the 1960s, a single income could support a family, buy a home, and still leave room to save. In the 2020s, with laptops, smartphones, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence, millions of people work longer hours just to stay afloat. This is not a story about laziness. It is not a story about a lack of technology. It is a story about productivity, the invisible engine behind wages, growth, and living standards, and how it has quietly stalled in the world's richest economies. For more than a decade, the United States, Europe, and Japan have experienced something that should not be happening in an age of relentless innovation. Output per worker has slowed. In some years, it has barely grown at all. And yet corporate profits have risen, asset prices have exploded, and technology has advanced at a pace unmatched in human history. How did we get here? Who benefits from an economy where efficiency rises on paper but prosperity does not spread? And what happens if this slowdown becomes permanent? This is the hidden productivity crisis reshaping the global economy, without headlines, without sirens, but with consequences that reach into every household. To understand why this matters, we have to step back and ask a simple question. What is productivity, really? Productivity is not about working harder. It is about producing more value with the same amount of effort. When productivity rises, societies can afford higher wages, shorter working hours, better public services, and stronger safety nets. Almost every broad improvement in living standards over the last 2 centuries traces back to gains in productivity. In the decades after World War II, this relationship was clear and powerful. From the 1950s through the early 1970s, productivity in the United States and Western Europe grew rapidly. Factories became more efficient, infrastructure expanded, education improved, and technology diffused widely across society. As productivity rose, wages followed. The middle class expanded. One income was often enough to support a household. But sometime in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the story began to change. Productivity growth slowed, not collapsed overnight, slowed. And over time, that slowdown compounded. In the United States, average annual productivity growth fell from around 2.8% in the post-war boom to roughly 1.3% in the decades that followed. In Europe, it slowed even more. In Japan, productivity growth stagnated for long stretches altogether. At first, this was easy to ignore. Credit expanded, globalization lowered prices, asset markets boomed, living standards appeared to rise, even if wages lagged behind. But beneath the surface, the engine that once lifted everyone was losing power. To see why, we need to return to the era when productivity growth was strongest. In the mid-20th century, capital flowed into factories, infrastructure, and people. Governments invested heavily in highways, power grids, housing, and public education. Businesses reinvested profits into expanding productive capacity. New technologies, electricity, automobiles, mass manufacturing, did not stay confined to elite firms. They spread across the economy, raising output in nearly every sector. This diffusion mattered. Productivity growth was broad-based, not concentrated. When one factory became more efficient, thousands of workers benefited. When logistics improved, entire supply chains became cheaper and faster. Productivity gains translated directly into higher wages because workers were essential to production, and firms competed for labor. Then, the structure of the economy began to change. Starting in the late 20th century, advanced economies gradually shifted away from production toward finance, services, and asset ownership. This shift did not happen overnight, and it was not the result of a single policy. It emerged from a series of incentives that slowly redirected capital away from productivity-enhancing investment and toward activities that generated short-term returns. One of the most important changes was financialization. As financial markets grew larger and more sophisticated, they also became more powerful. Profits increasingly came not from producing goods or improving efficiency, but from trading assets, extracting fees, and leveraging debt. Corporate strategy followed. Instead of reinvesting earnings into new equipment, worker training, or research, many firms found it more profitable to buy back their own shares, acquire competitors, or speculate in real estate and financial instruments. This shift had profound consequences. Capital that once built factories and infrastructure now flowed into assets that inflated prices without increasing productive capacity. Productivity growth slowed, even as balance sheets expanded. At the same time, housing became one of the largest sinks for capital in advanced economies. Homes are essential for living, but they are not inherently productivity enhancing. When more and more investment pours into existing housing stock, prices rise, rents increase, and households devote a larger share of income to shelter, less money remains for education, entrepreneurship, or consumption that drives innovation. In cities like London, New York, and Paris, real estate prices surged far faster than wages. The result was a paradoxical economy. Wealth appeared to grow, but it was locked into assets rather than flowing through productive activity. Another force quietly dragging down productivity was the rise of market concentration. In many industries, competition declined. Large firms acquired rivals, dominated platforms, and built barriers that made entry difficult. In theory, large firms should be more productive. In practice, many dominant companies focused on extracting rents rather than pushing efficiency gains throughout the economy. Technology amplified this effect. Digital platforms allowed a small number of firms to serve massive markets with relatively few workers. Productivity gains accrued to shareholders and executives, but they did not spread widely across the labor force. The result was high profits alongside stagnant median wages. At the other end of the spectrum, low interest rates kept unproductive firms alive. After repeated financial crises, central banks held interest rates near zero for years. This policy stabilized markets, but it also created a new problem, so-called zombie firms. These companies generated just enough revenue to service debt, but not enough to invest or innovate. Instead of exiting the market and freeing up resources, they lingered, tying up labor and capital in low productivity uses. Over time, the economy filled with firms that survived without improving. Productivity growth suffered. All of this occurred against a backdrop of rising inequality. As productivity growth slowed, the link between productivity and wages weakened. Workers no longer captured the gains they helped create. In many countries, productivity continued to rise modestly, but wages stagnated. The difference flowed upward into profits, executive compensation, and asset prices. For ordinary people, the consequences were immediate and tangible. Longer working hours did not lead to higher living standards. Education became more expensive, but did not guarantee better pay. Housing absorbed more income. Economic anxiety spread, even in countries that appeared wealthy on paper. The political effects soon followed. When productivity growth is strong, societies can afford compromise. When growth is weak, distribution becomes a zero-sum game. Every gain for one group feels like a loss for another. This dynamic fueled resentment, polarization, and the rise of populist movements across the developed world. But this slowdown was not universal. Some countries managed to sustain higher productivity growth by making different choices. In parts of Northern Europe, governments invested heavily in education, training, and active labor market policies. Workers were supported through transitions, allowing new technologies to spread without leaving large segments of society behind. Productivity gains translated more directly into wages. In East Asia, countries like South Korea and Taiwan pursued deliberate industrial strategies. Capital was steered toward export-oriented manufacturing, advanced technology, and human capital development. Productivity rose not just in elite firms, but across entire industries. These examples reveal an uncomfortable truth. Productivity decline is not inevitable. It is shaped by policy, incentives, and institutional design, which brings us to the present moment and to artificial intelligence. AI promises dramatic efficiency gains. In theory, it could automate routine tasks, enhance decision-making, and unlock new forms of innovation. Some studies estimate that AI could raise productivity growth significantly over the next decade. But history offers a warning. Technology alone does not guarantee broad prosperity. Without the right institutions, AI may deepen the very problems that caused the productivity slowdown in the first place. If AI boosts profits without raising wages, inequality will widen. If it displaces workers without retraining and support, productivity gains will not translate into higher living standards. The critical question is not whether AI increases productivity. It is who captures the gains. If AI becomes another tool for rent extraction, concentrated in a handful of firms, deployed to cut labor costs rather than expand opportunity, the productivity crisis will persist, even as technology advances. If, instead, societies invest in diffusion, training workers, supporting transitions, and ensuring competition, AI could help rebuild the engine that once powered shared growth. The future hinges on choices that are being made right now. Governments can redirect investment away from asset inflation and toward productive capacity. Tax systems can reward long-term investment over short-term speculation. Competition policy can limit excessive concentration. Education and training can prepare workers to complement rather than compete with new technologies. None of these changes are simple. All of them face resistance from powerful interests that benefit from the current system. But the alternative is a slow erosion of prosperity, an economy that grows richer on paper while leaving most people behind. Productivity is not just an economic metric. It is a social contract. When productivity rises and gains are shared, societies become more stable, more cohesive, and more optimistic about the future. When productivity stalls and gains are captured by a few, trust erodes and politics turns bitter. The story of the modern economy is not one of technological failure. It is a story of misaligned incentives, of capital flowing to the wrong places, of systems designed for extraction rather than creation. The question is not whether we can reverse the productivity slowdown. It is whether we choose to, because if we do not, the paradox of our time will deepen, a world more advanced than ever before, yet increasingly unable to deliver the prosperity it promises. And that is a crisis no amount of technology can solve on its own. The crisis of value in a digital age. To fully grasp the magnitude of this productivity paradox, we must look beyond the stagnation of charts and into the bifurcation of daily life. The modern economy has split into two distinct realities, a deflationary world of technology and an inflationary world of essential needs. Thanks to globalization and technological scaling, the cost of digital distractions, large screen televisions, smartphones, and streaming services has plummeted. Yet, the cost of the pillars that actually secure a middle-class life, healthcare, childcare, higher education, and housing, has skyrocketed, often outpacing inflation by double or triple digits. This creates a disorienting experience for the average American worker. They are surrounded by cheap, high-tech abundance, yet they feel increasingly precarious. This is the tangible result of the productivity stall. We have become highly efficient at producing things we want, but increasingly inefficient at providing the things we need. This disconnect is exacerbated by the gig economy and the erosion of the employer-employee relationship. In the quest for short-term efficiency, corporations have unbundled jobs into tasks, replacing stable careers with contract work. While this boosts revenue per employee's metrics, making firms look more productive on Wall Street, it shifts the overhead costs of healthcare, retirement planning, and stability onto the individual. The result is a workforce that is technically working, yet exhausted by the administrative burden of simply existing. When a worker spends hours navigating a complex health insurance claim or driving for a rideshare app to supplement their income, that effort shows up nowhere in productivity statistics. It is invisible labor, born from a system that prioritizes the velocity of capital over the stability of human capital. Furthermore, we are approaching a reckoning regarding how we define value. The sectors that are most resistant to productivity growth are often the most human-centric: nursing, teaching, caregiving, and the arts. You cannot make a string quartet play faster to increase efficiency, nor can a nurse care for twice as many patients without degrading the quality of care. As the economy shifts from manufacturing to services, these low-productivity sectors are becoming the dominant source of employment. The danger of the AI revolution is that it may attempt to apply an industrial logic to these deeply human endeavors. If we use AI merely to squeeze more efficiency out of doctors or teachers, turning patients and students into data points to be processed faster, we will not solve the productivity crisis. We will merely automate burnout. True prosperity in the 21st century requires a fundamental revaluation of labor. We must stop viewing wages solely as a cost to be minimized and start viewing them as the engine of demand and social cohesion. A sustainable economic model would direct capital not just toward algorithms that trade stocks in microseconds, but toward the physical world, retrofitting cities for climate resilience, rebuilding crumbling supply chains, and crucially, rewarding the care work that underpins all other economic activity. Ultimately, the productivity slowdown is a signal that the old engine has run its course. We cannot financialize our way to growth, nor can we simply code our way out of structural inequality. The next great leap in productivity will not come from a new gadget, but from a new social consensus, one that recognizes that an economy is only as efficient as the well-being of the people who power it. Without this shift, we risk building a future that is incredibly smart, yet profoundly broken.